In 1979, director Lucio Fulci ensured he would gain notoriety in the Italian horror genre. After many shifts of genre throughout his career, he finally found his calling as a master of gore with the beautifully violent undead classic Zombie Flesh Eaters. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, as was the case last week, this was with Mario Bava's Black Sunday. This was once again one of my introductions, shall we say, to the Italian horror genre. Again, I was not particularly aware of the genre or the fact that there were so many fantastic films within it. And much like that film, it took me a while to sort of get, shall we say, its the uniqueness, the dubbing, the atmosphere, and the just generally different approach, I think, to films that the fantastic Italian directors took, especially in the horror genre. So I'll just premise the discussion by clarifying the opening that I read out there is more in reference to the, shall we say, perceptions of Fulci that exist. So say that he would, gain notoriety in the Italian horror genre. In my opinion, Fulci has some unbelievable films. In fact, Don't Torture a Duckling is my favourite film of all time. So there's a big statement for you. The thing is, I think to a large extent, he'd been within the giallo genre for, the time that it was big, sort of late 60s through to the mid 70s. But none of his films quite got the recognition I think that they deserved. So what's so interesting about this film is it's such an unbelievable about turn from where he was. He'd certainly dealt with gore before, but never like this. And I think he took advantage of the present, at the time, popularity of the genre and really made it into something slightly different. He sort of interpreted it in his own way. This is very much an ode to the history of zombie films. It's very much located within the voodoo history of it, right from the sort of 20s and 30s when the concept first became a thing. But at the same time, in its gloriously Italian horror way, it was always exploiting the trends of the market. So I believe, my understanding is that the filmmakers, probably Fulci himself, got into a little bit of legal trouble because they did market this film as Zombie 2, and George Romero's classic Dawn of the Dead in 1978 in Italy, I believe, was called Zombie. So they'd sort of build it as this sequel to it, which, funnily enough, apart from its partial American setting, New York setting, shall we say, it really quite evidently has nothing to do with that film whatsoever. But that's the nature of the genre, I suppose. They were always trying to exploit trends and gain popularity, but I think what continues to draw me back to this genre, or I guess can we call it the Italian horror genre? I don't know, because I'm defining it in such a broad way. But what draws me back to it is that regardless of the fact that they were trying to exploit the trends of film, they still were always able to make films that were great in their own right. So if it took a trend of people being interested in zombie films at this particular time in order for this particular movie to be made, then so be it, right? It is. I think what I love about it is it's cheesy in the extreme, right? I suspect that, obviously this isn't my own experience, and I haven't necessarily talked to people about it, but I suspect people that are a bit older than myself who were into the genre at the time, it's from that very sort of grindhouse tradition that I suspect if people remembered this film having just sort of seen it in the movies when it was out, that they would remember it as a lot more energetic and faster than it actually is. And I think the reason for that is that when the film does give you payoff with murders or gore, it's so effective and frankly over the top at times that I think it makes you, it sort of gives the impression that there's always something drastic happening. But funnily enough, I had another watch of it, and I must say I've watched this film many, many times in my life. It's actually quite a slow movie. Now, to be clear, that's not a criticism by any means, but it's very ponderous. The story isn't moving particularly fast, and there's a lot of scenes in this film that feel like they're building towards something else. One of my favorite things about this film is the soundtrack, that sort of that voodoo sounding soundtrack that continues to build as the movie goes on. Sometimes we hear it at the end of a scene with Dr. Maynard's wife, and we'll see it with scenes sort of while we're seeing shots of the village, and it's got this unbelievable sense of impending doom, right? Even while horrible things are happening. I love the way this film gives you the sense that it's building to a crescendo. And I mean, to an extent, I think it does pay us off. Interestingly, the actual final showdowns aren't necessarily actually the best aspect of what they're building to, but in some ways I feel like what the film's building to in a not necessarily symbolic sense, but simply in a sense of the most iconic moment, is when the conquistadors or conquistadores rise from the dead. That is an unbelievable scene, right? And in that moment, it feels as though the music and the suspense has actually been building to that, not necessarily the showdown, because as things are happening, like death is a bit of a mundanity by the end of this film, but it's more the fear of and the genius of building us towards something, to a crescendo of what indeed it is that we're dealing with here. And obviously we know what the zombies are, but I must say these are some of the best designed zombies in any zombie film I've seen. They are so dead. I'll make a brief mention of the fact that if the theory is that they've been dead for 400 years, these bodies, it's interesting that they're only just sort of, I mean, they're pretty rotten. They've got worms in them, but it's quite an interesting thing that maybe not necessarily a goof or an oversight, just a bit of a whatever, right? There's a lot of stuff happening in this film that it takes some serious liberties with. So, getting to the specifics of the film now. Iconic opening, right? We see the gun, we hear the shot. The boat can leave now. Tell the crew. And then we lead into the sensational theme music, right? I think if the aim of a theme music in a film, and we'll go a horror film specifically, is to capture the atmosphere and the vibe of the film, or indeed add atmosphere and vibe to the film, this theme sounds more like a movie than just about any theme I can think of, right? It so much sounds like the impending doom of the zombies and the death that's coming. It sounds like evil, right? It sounds like a foreboding thing and a foreboding place. It's such an unbelievable start to the movie, right? Like, it's just and it's one of those things that I think's become more common actually in movies more recently, actually, where you'll see some thing happening in an unspecified place, right, and time, and eventually we'll get to that point of the movie, and it is often sort of not at the end of the movie, but sort of 2/3 ish of the way through, and that's what happens in this one. And it's sort of it's sort of weird, because I never think it's a I just don't think it's a good idea in general, because they never seem to be done in a way that's like, well, why specifically are we circulating to this moment? And I think the answer in this film is, frankly, that the boat can leave now, tell the crew without context is just one of the coolest motherfucking lines. And they thought, well, what a way to start the movie. Because it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense why we're starting here. But here we are, and then it kicks into the fantastic music, which is great. Then we get the briefest of ties to Dawn of the Dead, as the film tries to do, with the boat in the harbour. It's not necessarily made that clear how the boat manages to make it back to New York, although I guess it's possible that bloke on the boat was living most of the way. Although actually, I have a feeling, I mean, all of his food's rotten and stuff, so I don't know. But again, look, it's easy to get critical of this movie if you really want to nitpick a lot of the stuff that's going on. So it's probably best not to, and best to focus on the actual, just the stuff that's happening, because the visuals in this film are absolutely brilliant. So they send those two coast guards out to the boat. It's interesting that some of the dialogue is like this boat's on a collision course with every boat in the harbour, and then like right after that you see the harbour and there's like no boat. There's like one other boat in the harbour, and this one's not moving particularly fast. So a lot of the dialogue in this film is so cheesy, but there's just a part of me that thinks, all right, well, we're watching a really cheesy but epic, gory zombie film. It probably wouldn't be the same, right, if the dialogue was well written. I don't know, maybe I'm being too kind to it, but there's just something classically late 70s horror about these bumbling Coast Guard idiots almost literally bumbling their way onto this boat, and then one of them dying because of his stupidity. So, they have a very confected conversation about making a bit of a killing if they return the boat, and they're all happy about that. One of them goes to the bottom of the boat and has a look around, and see, this is actually a bit of a precursor, I think. There are moments in this film that are a bit of a precursor to the Gates of Hell trilogy, the three Fulci films that were all made in pretty quick succession after this film, where there are just a lot of moments where here's some violence, here's some gory stuff, and let's really, really exaggerate it. I'm thinking of like just the amount of maggots in City of the Living Dead, or that scene where those tarantulas are just eating that guy in, I think, The Beyond. There's just some really extended moments of gore, and in this, like they just like to display the gore, right? Like in this boat, when the cop goes down, he's just looking at some crap. There's these awful looking massive bug things. What are they, centipedes, millipedes, or something, crawling around on a piano. There's some food that seems to have rotted. Like the whole thing, it's like, and the music's got that high pitch sort of sense, and it's like the ability of Fulci to make you feel uncomfortable is rivaled by almost no one else in this era, I think, and it's absolutely great stuff. So then the zombie comes out, very imposing zombie. I think this is one of the subtly clever things about this film, right? He is tall, and he's large, and he's imposing to this cop who can't do anything to stop him, gets overpowered, and then gets bitten, and blood's absolutely gushing from his neck, and like it's a very, very good way of introducing us to the zombies, because, and I think I've mentioned this before on previous podcasts, sort of like killing the kid near the start of Jaws, and also of course the opening scene of Jaws, where you have to always be on edge now as a viewer, because you've seen the extent of what the monster is capable of, and always keeps you on edge. And also, I think it sort of satisfies that itch for gore and violence that people have gone to this movie to see. And as I said, that there's a lot of interesting pacing in this film, slow pacing, that they probably needed to satisfy a bit of a gory itch in order to justify that. Because aside from some of the cheesy dialogue and just the fact that it's like a cheap, awesome horror movie, the fact is this is actually quite a well thought out, I think, and well put together film, like all things considered. Like, you can tell it's obviously quite cheap, but it's just pretty cool. So what's his name? Peter West, I think. Peter West is a reporter, and this is probably the most out of place scene in the film. He's talking to his boss, Lucio Fulci, who's playing like the boss of this newspaper or whatever, and he's having this conversation with him. And there's something so funny about this scene, because I always find the dubbing for Fulci when he plays his little cameos, or should I say big cameos. It's funny how Fulci tends to play like a whole role for a scene in these movies. But so he's like in it for one scene, but he has a bit of a line, and he's got this hilarious New York accent, which is just perfect, right? Because I guess as an Italian you can sort of get away with it, but it's like as a viewer who knows who Fulci is, like, I'm not buying this. But also the dubbing on Fulci is generally terrible, because I think that, like, this isn't always easy to tell, but usually I get the impression that these films are shot in English. That is to say that the characters are talking or at least mouthing English. And I think Fulci does it. It's just that he was really bad at it. So it tends to look like his particular dubbing looks absolutely ridiculous most of the time. But, I sort of thrive on it. And then he says, don't just because you got the whole paper. Oh, sorry, just because your uncle bought the paper, don't think blah blah blah. And it's just classic Lucio Fulci cameo bullshit, and I absolutely love it. So what do we have then? The Tisa Farrow. Hang on, let's just get a list. This absolutely poor preparation, guys. But this is not podcast 101 stuff here. But so Tisa Farrow's character goes to the boat to try to suss some things out, and in this scene, it's sort of interesting, like how how the character of Peter West, he has this sort of attempt to be like definitive, or like I'm in charge or something. But his smoothness I don't buy. So I can't remember the exact line, but she's skulking around and he puts his hand on her mouth and says, "Don't be scared, I'm a reporter, blah blah blah." And then when he takes it away, he explains almost mansplains, "Oh, I had to do that or else she would have screamed." And then he sort of says, "Let me guess, you're here for blah 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 blah." And it's just like, all right. Her name's Anne, by the way. I'm sure you guys knew that. And it's like, yep, cool. Why are you such a jerk though, Peter? Like, you're just a reporter, but she's trying to investigate the death of her father. But it's probably there are probably a few flaws about this film, let's be honest, but I think one of the frustrating flaws about this film is how the film so very nearly develops the characters in a way that makes you really care about them, but just doesn't quite. I don't know if other people agree with this, but because it's like a 90-minute film, and there's only so much time you can dedicate to things, and a big portion of their time is like extended set pieces of gore and stuff. So they sort of have to do a fair bit of heavy lifting, right, in these moments, and the result is that the film wants us to buy, I think, that Peter and Anne are like getting romantically interested in each other, and in a literal sense they are, but like if you consider the whole circumstances of the film and everything, it's a subplot I'm not buying, to be honest. But also I don't think Peter really earns his way into Anne's heart the way the film tries to claim he does. Sometimes Anne feels like she's real definitive and sassy, and then other times she seems absolutely pathetic. Like, we'll get to the scene soon, but the way they convince the other two guys to get onto their boat, I was born on a boat. It's like, well, all right, but she doesn't sort of act in this way at other times. So anyway, they come up with this idea because they're in the bottom of the boat, and then they make a noise and they hear the cop on top of the boat moving around. Like, oh, we're going to have to work what we're doing. So they pretend that they're, love interests, and they're sort of making out with each other, so the cop doesn't pretend doesn't know that they're there for no reason, for a reason. So again, there's some really cheesy dialogue about the same old story, and then Peter West saying, "Oh, I would have been happy with a boxcar," and then there's "Oh no, not another boxcar," and the whole thing's just so camp and stuff. But I guess they get away with it here because, like, they are actors acting as if they're acting, I suppose. So the fact that this is completely not believable at all, I guess they can get away with it here because that's sort of the point. But again, the heavy lifting, I feel like, I'm almost convinced, and there's something rather humorous about the fact that right after they've met Ian McCulloch, Peter West has this opportunity to make out with his future and probably already present love interest. But, whatever, right? So Peter does some journalism and some investigating and finds out a little bit about what's happening on the island where Maynard is with his wife, and we start sort of getting these films, these scenes sort of filtered through, and whatever. It's information that we're sort of getting, I suppose, and Peter is as well, which is good. There's also that scene where, in fact, this might have actually been before these two met, but I can't quite remember, where Anne is talking to the police, and it's just really awkwardly shot. She's, asking, "I want to know about my father," and they're all, they're just assholes to her. And then the guy, with the sort of the other cop out of the two, he's like, after she asks where he is, she's like, "That's just what we want to find out," or whatever. And I just need to bring that because that guy looks like exactly like Tucker Carlson, which I find absolutely hilarious. So anyway, they fly to, I think it's the Dominican Republic. I know that there's an announcement about that on the PA at the airport, very fancy looking airport. And so they're in some taxi with this guy, and like, I think this moment, I know if you wanted to be like a wokester guy, you could say it's actually a bit of a negative representation of like the locals, because he sort of gets them to bribe him for information about a boat. Like, oh no, boats, they're pretty hard to find. Like, as if it'd be impossible to hire a boat at a place where, like, it's basically completely surrounded by water. But anyway, we'll let that slide. But I think what it does do, this guy's sort of dodginess, is just give that sense of secrecy and like the locals being superstitious and voodoo and stuff. I think that's one of the really effective elements of the film, right? So yeah, I think the next sort of section of the film is just these moments are, I don't know, rather hilarious. So they go to the boat where Brian and Susan are, and they're on holiday, right? Brian and Susan, they're meant to be on holiday. So, nonetheless, Peter and Anne just sort of say, oh, we need a boat, we need to go looking for Matul. And, Brian's all, you wouldn't happen to be looking for a boat by any chance, would you? And it's like, well, the agreement is you pay your share. It's like, fuck that. Here are these two people. They don't have any particular... why should they care? Well, because they're other Americans or something. He just lets them on the boat and he doesn't even get there. While they're on holiday, which he's at pains to emphasise a number of times. But... whatever, they're just really nice people, apparently. I think the film does have a sort of... if you think about how unreasonable it is to Brian, I always feel like later in the film after Susan's been killed and Peter's there pulling him away, like, come on, Brian, there's nothing you can do. It's like, well, mate, what I could have done is not let you on my boat and destroy my entire life. Right. For no good reason, by the way, because all they end up doing is finding out that, yes, her dad is indeed dead, and then they find out about the virus and the zombies, and then that's it. Like, it doesn't actually achieve anything. It's an utterly futile sort of a bunch of things that are happening in this film. But nonetheless, I think this group of 4 characters, I don't know, they feel like they have a reasonably good sort of on-screen chemistry. I don't know if you guys agree. It's the most this little part of the film. It's the most effective part of the film at actually getting you, I think, to care about the characters. So they leave on the boat, and again, there's some guy on the dock, like, I don't know, tying something up, and the camera zooms into him, and he does a little cross his heart thing, and the music gives us a cue that he knows that there's something bad that's going to happen. Again, because, and this stuff's really effective because ultimately it's a slow film, right? After the initial couple of scenes of excitement, I guess even in those scenes of excitement, right? Like even when the cop gets eaten by the big zombie, there's still a sense that the film's gathering information for us. It's not nothing that, and we don't care about that guy. We have no context for who's getting shot or why they're getting shot in the very opening scene. So really, it takes a very, very long time until there's actual payoff in terms of the characters that we know and supposedly care about actually being affected. But again, this isn't a criticism. I think this is a really effective part of the film. So while they're on the boat initially, Maynard and his wife are sort of arguing. I think these scenes just, the dialogue is just good enough, I suppose. I think, I can't think of the actress's name, but I think that his wife is, she just gets away with the overacting, I think is how I would say it, and it's good because the dub on her is just good enough, I think, within the context, of course, of knowing that the dubbing can be a bit shitty in these movies. But, it just sort of survives. It's not survives. It's just good enough to be like, yeah, I can align the level of franticness, if that's a word, in her voice with the sort of over eye acting and shaking and stuff that she's doing. I don't mind the melodrama of it, right? I mean, I know it's probably from a time of more sexist depictions and blah, 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 but there is always an element of these sort of like comatose sort of helpless women in these films, and who are just unable to defend themselves. But at the same time, when you consider the ending that her character gets, her attempts to defend herself didn't really work particularly well anyway. So, she tried, but ultimately it didn't really work. But we'll get to that scene because that that's an unbelievable scene, right? One of the classic, and there are a lot of classic horror scenes. So while we get a little bit of context with Maynard and his wife. You still think that you're the doctor that you once were, and he's really, quite dismissive of her, and we're learning about him having his patients and even colleagues, I assume, being sick. I'm not totally sure, but again, building, and then we go back to the boat, and Susan or Retta Gay decides to go diving naked for. I'm going to hazard a guess. I'm going to hazard a couple of guesses here. For a start, Retta Gay is very good looking, so they obviously decided to take advantage of that. But here's and evidently was willing to shoot this scene, which is frankly inexplicable, right? In the context of the movie, yeah, they're on holiday and stuff, but there's nothing before or after this scene with Brian or Susan that suggests they're like swingers or something, or they don't really up to this point seem like they're the kind of people that, Susan will just get undressed and Brian wouldn't care that Peter's just looking her up and down. It's just so bizarre. And it's also hilarious the way Peter is looking at her and tries briefly to pretend to Anne that he's not, and then sort of sneaks his way back to looking at her. But look, I had to dwell on this because it's just so hilarious. I also love the way that when she's undressing, she's deliberately avoiding eye contact with them, but knows that they're looking. So I don't know. It's like, I'll hazard my guess as to why this is in it, other than the obvious. I think this is Grindhouse era sort of culture, and I think in many cases when people were going to grindhouses to see grindhouse films or grindhouse type films, they had two major expectations, and that was violence and female nudity. And in many cases, I would hazard a speculative guess to say most cases, the violence and nudity was in many cases linked. And for the most part, this film isn't sexualized, right? There's no real motivation by some killer to sort of, get some kind of revenge on the female naked body or whatever. It's just that it's not really written into the story. So the film has to find excuses for nudity in this film to some extent, and this is just one of them. So, the excuses in other films like it are more like characters are having sex, but there's never... The only indication of characters having sex in this movie are when Peter and Anne are faking it on the boat, the initial boat in New York. So it's like, oh, well, we better write this in, and they really, really labour the point. It's fair to say. Look, I suppose it would be easier for Susan to, go scuba diving if she's topless and pretty much completely declothed. I suppose. I don't know. I've never been scuba diving before. Nonetheless, she dives in after Anne has unimpressedly looked over at Peter, but, So anyway, she dives in, and frankly, the next sequence just could never be shot in another film ever again. And it's unbelievable. So, for a start, and I'll acknowledge, there's the classic theme that we've talked about, and also this sort of zombie, the howling and the drums and stuff that's building. Those two are iconic and brilliant. Just the other musical cues, like the noises, like the music that's happening while she's under the water before the zombie comes out, like it's so atmospherically effective, right? This film is made so much better than it otherwise would have been because of the music, and the music is spot on so much in this film. So there's this, almost foreboding sound to the music while she's swimming around under there, and then we see the shark, and it's interesting because, well, based on what happens with the zombie, evidently this shark is used to dealing with shark handlers, so it doesn't feel like it's moving around in a threatening way, but it does get very close to the actress. But also, it's worth mentioning there are a few shots that actual continuity errors where the shark's sort of back from where it was in the previous shot. But anyway, it does give the sense that it's like following her around. They're trying to give the sense that it's actually attacking her. That's the one aspect of this scene that fails, because the truth is quite obviously they couldn't shoot it attacking her. So their attempts to make it look like it's attacking her are rather comical. And then there's that scene where it, in inverted commas, bumps into the boat like it's attacked the boat. There's just no way that... It's just not acting in a way that suggests it's being hostile in any way. But nonetheless, I don't want to be too critical because it is an amazing scene. She goes and hides in some coral with... from the shark. And then... It's such a great revelation, right? Because the camera's quite close up over her shoulder, and we see the hand come into frame and tap her. And I love the reaction, even if it's completely ridiculous and unrealistic. She looks over as if, who's tapping me on the shoulder? And then she looks away. She does like a double take. It's like, as if she's like, hang on, why would someone be tapping me on the shoulder here? And then this zombie's there, and again, who cares? No explanation, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's just a zombie under the water that's like, here's a nude scuba diver, let's tap her on the shoulder. She eventually gets rid of him with rubbing coral in his eyes, which is actually quite effective, this shot, because of the way they obviously rub it on the camera, which is cool, like the zombie POV shot. So then she sort of wrestles him away and he goes after the shark. Now, I spent a lot of time thinking about this scene over the years and being like, is it a little bit problematic that quite obvious... What's the term for a shark wrangler? Or is that the term? Or a shark handler. Let's call him a shark handler. It's obvious that this zombie is an actual shark handler because he's doing all these moves and stuff, right? But and I've gone, does that undermine the scene somewhat? And then I think, well, no, for two reasons. One is zombies have no rules, or the rules that they have don't have anything to do with sharks. So who's to say that zombies wouldn't act in this way if they came across a shark, right? But the other is, we just will never have any other context because no other film would ever try to shoot this scene. Like, the audacity of this scene. Let's have a zombie versus shark fight, right? That sounds good on paper. Let's actually do it. Nah, Fulci, I don't think we're going to be able to pull this off, mate. But no, they do. And it's damn effective, I think. I don't know. Look, there's probably information out there on this. I don't know if the guy actually gets bitten. I feel like he does, because the way that blood spurts out is damn cool. And he sort of fake bites into the shark, and it's like the whole thing is like how can you have this in a film? And this is the glory of not doing special effects and just doing it for real, right? There will never be able to be a scene like this in another film that looks better, because it just won't be as real as this. It's just unbelievable. In fact, I've got a book here called Italian Horror Cinema, edited by Stefano Becerra and Russ Hunter. You should check that out, guys. It's like an academic book that has an image of that on the cover. So I sort of like that. It feels as though it's like a very iconic image in Italian horror cinema, and frankly, it is. So then, as Susan resurfaces and gets back onto the boat, and they cover her up finally, much to probably a lot of people's disappointment, and she's all, there was a man down there. And then Peter's like, a man? And then that's just the end of that. It cuts rather dramatically away, and it's like, it's a pretty unbelievable thing that's happened, and the film just doesn't sort of dwell on it at all. But, I guess it's implied, obviously, that, she's gone into further detail with them, but we don't sort of see a lot of them, if at all, I think, until they're sort of established on the island at this point. But, it is what it is. So then the film, again, this is all contextual, right? And now that I think about it, of course, there's no, they don't have a lot of context, these four characters, for this. Certainly the two boat owners, because they haven't really been informed of anything. And then Peter and Anne have just heard stuff, but they haven't really seen any of the zombies yet. So I do, and for all the gore and some excitement that we've had so far in the film, we haven't seen that much. A lot of it's rumor and innuendo and stuff. So it's like, what a way to sort of up the stakes, but by having an underwater zombie who attacks a shark. It's just sort of hanging around under there, right? For whatever reason. But I just think it works. Right, I think the slow building of the stakes in this film are, really, really, really effective. So now I think the film begins to really push home the history and, let's say, traditions of zombies as a concept. So there are more and more scenes with Dr. Maynard, and he's rather patronizing to that doctor lady that's with him. I'm not sure if we sort of have another interaction with him and his wife. She ends up back at the cottage, and he talks to, I think it's Lucas is his name, the local guy who has a bit of an accent, and he's trying to sort of feed him information about stuff, he's talking about his superstitions and things, and Maynard's he's like better than him, right? He thinks, no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a local. He's just almost like a servant is what he sort of feels like there. And it just adds to that sense of it being voodoo. I think this is one of the key aspects of the film. While it makes Maynard not very likable, and in some way that's actually one of the things I always get the impression they sort of wanted Maynard to be likable, but he wasn't able to be made likable because they needed someone to not be taking the voodoo seriously or whatever. The film is at pains to emphasize to us that it doesn't believe in voodoo either, right? It doesn't. This isn't a film that these strange happenings are normal, right? This is a normal real world scenario that these strange happenings are happening in. So that's a really, really important thing. But nonetheless, to never sort of let us off from the kind of thing we're watching, both back in terms of the gore and the sexuality. There's that scene where Maynard's wife, who also looks quite good, is in the shower, and like there's plenty of mirrors and stuff, so we can see a lot. And you know, if we wanted to go real film analysis-y, we could say that this is a sort of. This is a voyeuristic shot, right? And her character is very, very tragic in this film. We get introduced to her as this sort of highly strung, rightfully, by the way, highly strung a wife who just can't get through to her stupid husband, who is sort of clinging on to old beliefs and stuff, and really wants to get off this island that she feels is a bit of a death trap, and it turns out it very much is for her. And now we're watching her shower for some reason. Or the zombies watching her shower. And it's interesting because, again, they have this sort of effective shot of hands. There's some really effective shots of hands coming into camera in this film, where he sort of touches the window or whatever. But it's interesting because it really creates this sense of nowhere is safe, right? And as the film goes on, and that is very much reflected by the growing loudness and frequency and consistency, shall we say, of that that voodoo style music, that everyone's running out of time, right? That if you don't get a move on at some point, you're not going to be able to leave, or at some point you're going to be overwhelmed. And yeah, that is sort of that's sort of what's going on in this film. And so she's effectively being stalked by the zombie. Again, and this is where it's a 90-minute film where they have to decide, okay, to what extent are we doing character development? To what extent are we doing gore? And it seems like this that you realise we're prioritizing the gore. So there's quite an extended, maybe couple of minutes of her sort of walking around, hearing noises and then thinking, oh, nah, I'm imagining it. Then definitely hearing noises and being like, okay, I'm in trouble. Then the zombie gets into the house and she's trying to close it out of the door, and and again, this film's so good with the gore, right? She pushes the door closed on its fingers, and the fingers come off, and it's just just yet another moment of brilliant gore, and there's plenty more of those to come. One very, very quickly. There is one slight criticism I have of this scene. So after she closes the door and cuts off the fingers and presumably shuts him out, and the zombie finds another way to break through. The one flaw in it is that the camera doesn't reveal the extent of the danger of the eye splint or the splint early enough. So the first we see it is like a POV shot of her as she's getting pulled by the hair by the zombie. But you can't really tell how long it is, and it sort of gets closer and closer to us and her eye until eventually you see a side shot of it, and it's like, oh, well, fuck, I don't want that to go into her eye. But that's a very mild criticism because you do see it. Fuck me. When it goes into her eye, that is fucking hard to watch. Like, that is an amazing, amazing scene of horror, of gore, of brutality. Like, you can just imagine some of the sick minds of the horror film director or creator, writer, whatever. Like, oh, what if we stuck a massive splint into some attractive woman's eye? What if we did that? And what if we made it as terrifying and as hard to watch as possible? Just absolute, just awful, awful thing. Like, yeah, we can pull that off. So the way she screams it goes into her eye, the image of it going into her eye, and then the way the camera sort of gives us a good few seconds of her screaming while it's in her eye. Whatever. right? Just as much horror, as much terror as we can possibly deal with. You know, it's just an absolutely magnificent scene, you know. So, you know, it's even without the zombie versus shark scene or the Conquistadors Rising scene, the film would still likely be infamous just for this, right? Like, the truth is, I think this film is famous or infamous, well known in a cult classic sort of way, because of this scene and others. But I think, like, to really give the film credit, I think it earns the right to these scenes, right? Like, just thinking about it now, she really uses her eyes to act a lot, right? Like, one of the things we think about this character in the couple scenes that we have of her are of her eyes being really wide, you know, really scared. So we associate her with her eyes, right? It's subtly genius filmmaking, right? So the punishment is all the more extreme when the time comes. So after this, we move back to, and it's quite a while until they are aware that she's not okay, right? So there's more atmosphere building scenes, like they shoot another one of the patients and pile it into this mass grave with other patients, and if memory serves, the you know, voodoo music is getting louder and louder, and it sort of sounds as if it's coming closer. Then they cut back to the first scene, and Maynard explaining, I think he explains it to the main four characters who are just sort of there now. Maynard explaining to them what happened, right? It's rather humorous that, and this is Anne's dad, so that he's, you know, explains that he's died and that he had to shoot him. But it's interesting that, like, the audio recording is different, right? The boat can leave now, tell the crew. Like, it's much more casual than it was at the start, I think. But nonetheless, so this really is like the futility of it all, because the extent to which they've put their lives at risk in order to find out what was going on. So they've finally reached the destination, the information, just as everything's completely falling to shit, right? Pretty much all the patients are dead. Maynard's wife is dead, not that anyone realizes it yet. And there's now a sense that, you know, the music's getting louder. There's now the sense that you're in serious danger being on this island. So it's like, well, what the hell was the point in getting here? Or we found out that he was dead, which he was probably always going to be dead. And now, and that's it, right? Now you're all screwed. So he tells them to go and check on his wife at the cottage, which is pretty unreasonable, really. So they do. This, I suspect, is a slightly underrated scene. I love the revelation of them walking into the house and very slowly noticing what's going on. But what we very rarely see in any zombie flick is zombies just feasting, right? Like, you sort of get the impression, because she's quite eaten, like they're like eating her organs and stuff. They're ripping bits off her hand, and it's disgusting. There's four of them, but they're all sort of kneeling down. It's like, oh, we don't even have to wander around now. We can just we can just really devour her. And it's so effective because, again, these characters aren't really that aware of what's going on. But this scene is like, so everything Menard was saying before about the theory is right. I guess the man that was under the water, that's all correct, and this is happening. And obviously in that moment of realization, suddenly they're now in extreme danger. They try to get out of there, and zombies are coming from another part of the house, and they, beat a couple of them up and get back into the car and drive away. So again, totally futile. I mean, they got to find out that she was dead, but, a zombie walks in front of them on their way away, and they veer the car off the road and have to get out. They're finally at the point where, they're at breaking point, right? Peter's, I think, injured from the car crash. They're wandering around. And it's quite humorous, right? Because there's a point, for some reason they seem to be near the beach, which doesn't seem to make that much sense. But the music again is louder, and they acknowledge the music. Susan's like, I can't take it, but it might be Anne sort of says, the drums or something, and it's it becomes apparent at that moment that the music has actually been playing, right? It can actually be heard by the characters, which is sort of humorous. I don't know if it's meant to be funny, but I just thought it was for our benefit. What is it, diegetic and non-diegetic? I can't remember which one's which, but it's it switches without sort of telling us. It's quite funny. But it's who is playing the music then? Is it the zombies? Is it the locals? Or is it just the sound that comes from the from this area when zombies are about to rise or whatever? It's also not exactly clear. I don't think it's ever really made clear why this is happening at this particular time. It just sort of is. So we get a shot or a quote of Lucas telling Maynard, when the earth spits out the dead, they will come back to suck the blood from the living. Now, this is clearly just this is their Dawn of the Dead moment. But nonetheless, it's a cool line, so I'm glad it's in there. And then Maynard mocks him and he says, yes, you know much more than me. So, a bit of social commentary going on there. The rising scene... First, I'll acknowledge that Brian notices the graves and says they must be 400 years old, which is cool. But again, as I said earlier, why are the bodies only just sort of, they're intact but they're rotten? But why is that all that would have happened in 400 years? And there's still maggots in their eye sockets and stuff. But again, if this is what's happening, maybe this is what voodoo does, right? It's no more realistic. It's no more unrealistic than the fact that zombies are coming back, right? In fact, it's probably much more. The dead people are coming back as zombies. So it's probably, yeah. I'm not going to criticize it anyway because it just, what a scene, right? So Peter and Anne finally start making out as if the film's earned the right to do this, which it hasn't. And then a hand grabs her hair, and then Peter's leg, and then they start fighting and screaming, and Brian comes to help them. And that leaves poor defenseless Susan by herself. So she was so confident earlier in the film while she's undressing, but once she's under the water and getting attacked by sharks and underwater zombies, suddenly she's not so she's not so confident. We'll probably do it to the best of us. And this scene, her sort of defenselessness is necessary for the brilliance of this shot, because, and I think this is probably a popular opinion of well-versed zombie fanatics. The zombie that kills Susan is one of the best designed zombies in history, right? That is a fucking creepy motherfucker, and it is just, in order to do it justice, right, you need the idea that one of the characters is looking at it. And in order for a character to be looking at it for that long without doing anything, it has to be one of their comatose women. So Susan's just staring there, slowly looking over her shoulder and noticing it, very tediously, slowly getting up from the ground. But it's just, giving us all the glory possible of just how disgusting and terrifying this zombie is. And I love the point of view shot where it's noticing her, right? And how pathetic she is. And then it just sort of leans over and just bites her neck. And, maybe the effect is like unrealistic. I mean, I'm sure it's unrealistic, but what an effect it is, right? It sort of makes her skin look almost like it's melted, but it rips off. And I said blood was gushing out of the neck of the cop earlier on the boat. There is blood absolutely gushing out of Susan's neck here. What an effective shot this is, right? And another thing that's actually quite effective about this, and I don't know if they necessarily thought through this, but after this extensive build-up and then extensive bite and then extensive gushing of the blood, she just falls down dead, right? It doesn't overdo her horror or her pain. And there's something rather jarring about that, because everything in this film is so ponderous, even the moments of gore, that it's extended and it's meant to make us uncomfortable. Here she's just dead, and that's it, right? And then they deal with the zombie by cutting off its head with a cross, which is sort of symbolic and cool. And then Peter rather unreasonably just sort of says, "Come on, Brian, there's nothing we can do." Like as if Peter thinks Brian's a bit of an idiot for not understanding that they need to get moving, even though he's literally just seen his wife die. But nonetheless, again, this does I don't know. This is just the nature of how, I guess, how unreasonable Peter is, and just how unfair everything is on Brian. They steal his boat. His wife dies. Well, they don't steal it, but they use it. Nonetheless, she's dead. There's nothing you can do here. Come on, Peter. Are we meant to like him? Anyway, the three survivors get back to the church, and they have if it's a church, I don't know what it is actually. It's not really a church, is it? Well, the hospital, whatever it is. And, there's some dialogue with Maynard, but, this little sequence before the zombies get there is, again, it's about the spectacle of it all. The close-ups of the zombies walking to them. I love the fact that this film, right, it's a problem in a lot of zombie stuff where the zombies, because traditionally they move very, very slowly, right? And it's often hard to accept, right, that they would actually be as much of a threat that they are. There's something about the way this film's shot that is like, no, It doesn't feel like they could just run away. I think it's because they never make it clear where the zombies are coming from. And I don't think the characters particularly know. So, like, there is a sense, well, we actually do sort of need to go and hole up in this building because who the hell else, who knows where the hell else they're coming from, right? So, yeah, that's a really cool aspect of this, right? Because they move painfully slowly at times. But, you know, again, some of the makeup on these zombies, you know, you can tell that's where the heart of this film was in terms of, like, production. They were just desperate to make these zombies look as good as possible, and I love the mixture between the ones that are, like, you know, old conquistadors and new ones that have obviously died in the last few days. Like, it's just really, really cool. To be honest, it's probably my main criticism of the film. Again, I was talking about building up. It gets away with the crescendo in terms of action not being as good as maybe it might have been, purely because the actual rising up of the conquistador scene is so damn good. In fact, I'll go back to that. I'll just step back to that. After we've just seen Susan die and we've seen them run away, then the music starts. It's got the do, 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 and it shows multiple zombies getting up. And I think this is the reason that I said earlier that this music sounds so much like the movie, because this exact scene is exactly like, this is exactly what the music should sound like, right? While they're rising up, and there's a couple of, like, those POV shots where, like, dirt falls off the camera, and it's like, oh, this is just fucking sensational, right? It's tremendous horror filmmaking. So anyway, back to the slightly more disappointing scene. I guess I'm just not a massive fan of the setting in the hospital, right, where they're slowly shutting it up while the zombies are surrounding them. You know, like, it's okay, I suppose, but, you know. And this whole scene's helped again by the use of the music and the way they cut into the faster parts of the music, right, where they're using the Molotov cocktails. But yeah, I guess I find the whole sequence, the aspect of the sequence, it's like, here are some of our patients getting up and killing us, and now Lucas is dead and he gets up, and also I think the film dabbles with making Maynard seem significant, as in he is significant, sort of, but I think he needed a more dramatic death. Is it Lucas who gets him? No, it isn't. It isn't. It's that guy. It's that guy who told him earlier that he saw zombies in the village, I think, and, like, yeah. You know, it just comes out of nowhere a bit, and, like, I don't know. It's just not great. So, you know, people are dying and getting eaten by zombies and reanimating and eating each other, and it's like, yeah, whatever. You know, I just feel like this whole scene, the part of this film that goes really wants to sort of invade your mind is the extent of the gore and the payoff for atmosphere. But I think there's just a little bit too much going on in this scene. I don't think that's where, you know, the Fulci sort of specialized in that way. I think it was more subtle and more, yeah. I guess this scene just isn't quite as grand as it's meant to be, I think, is what I'm saying. But it's not bad. But so they eventually fight their way out with fire and guns and all kinds of things, and then Brian sees Susan and just lets her bite him, basically. It's like, oh, for Christ's sake. And then, you know, Peter is, like, reluctant to shoot her and stuff. And, like, he's too upset. But it's funny because Peter and Susan, you know, Peter's only real like for Susan seemed to be when she was getting undressed earlier. But again, that's like the emotional payoff for these characters just isn't quite what it could be. Like, I'm not buying Peter not shooting her because he's just seen her bite Brian, and earlier he's like, come on, there's nothing we can do. Just shoot her, Peter. I'm not buying this, right? Stop pretending you care. So he shoots her, and it's very sad. And, you know, we're just about done. They have a little debate on the boat, I guess the next morning, about whether they should sort of shoot Brian and get rid of him. But Peter's all, no, we have to keep him because we're going to need evidence. Which I guess makes sense. And look, I reckon they might have been stretching a little bit too far with the ending. Like, they put the radio on to try to get some better news, and then there's the recordings of, I think, back from New York where things are going wrong. The problem, I don't think they should have done this, because I think we would all agree the last image of the film is amazing, right? Of the zombies walking over, I assume it's the Brooklyn Bridge. I'm not that familiar with New York, but I assume that's what it is. And they're on top of the bridge, but we've just heard the dialogue, and I think while this is happening, we're even hearing beeping and stuff, like that sense of things being chaotic. The problem is that from the shot, we can see cars just casually driving back and forth, like both ways on the bridge. So now, for a start, they possibly should have just put the cameras in a different place so we didn't see that. And also, I'm not actually sure they had permission to be shooting here, and obviously they couldn't stop the traffic and all that. But either they should have just not shown the traffic, or they should have made it like this is how they're getting into New York for some reason, right? As if that's where they would start, but like everyone's not aware yet, like they're about to invade, so they could have done it without the audio that suggests it's all that everyone's aware of the cars. But nonetheless, far be it from me to suggest to the great man Lucio Fulci what he should have done. With that, I'll conclude the discussion about this film and use that as a bit of an explanation. So, Lucio Fulci, I big reason I'd say actually the main reason that I started this podcast was because I spent a long time working on a PhD that I never completed due to life difficulties and stuff, and it was based around almost exclusively around Lucio Fulci's work. So it's been a tough thing for me to move into this with, but this has been a really cathartic thing to return to Fulci's movies. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. What watching this movie has done again is reminded me of other movies from this era. I said last week I was going to do this week this one and then move into groups of 3. What I've decided that I'm going to do is sort of in a double inspiration from this particular podcast and movie. I'm going to make this the first of a three-parter. I won't call them parts, but in the titles and stuff. But next week I'll do the movie Zombie Holocaust, which is also known as Dr. Butcher MD. The reason I'll do that is because this film, that film, and then Burial Grounds and Nights of Terror, which I will do the week after, have almost been a series in my mind because I've always had those 3 films again from when I was watching these films when I first discovered them. I sort of bought them all in quick succession, and the Zombie Holocaust is basically stolen from this film. They even stole Ian McCullough and some of the some of the sets and even some of the actual footage is in that film. And so in my mind, like, they're very much linked, and I think that's from the year after, and then Burial Ground, The Nights of Terror is the year after, and it sort of, it's like, it's that spin-off of, oh, well, you know, let's make Zombie Flesh Eaters as a spin-off of something popular, and then that's popular, so like, let's make some spin-offs as well. Now, I'll premise it by saying the next two movies are absolutely fucking terrible movies. They are awful and ridiculous movies, but I absolutely love the fuck out of both of them. Zombie Holocaust has the unique thing of being a zombie and a cannibal movie in one. Now, obviously, our untrained listeners will think that, well, a zombie is basically a cannibal, but even within what we understand zombies and cannibals to be, zombies are reanimated dead people eating people, and cannibals are just people eating people. This movie has both, so I very much look forward to talking to it, and it is an absolute absurdity. So I'll make that the series, and then, as I said, inspired by Lucio Fulci, or inspired by this film to now reimagine and rethink about Lucio Fulci, I'm going to then do a 3-part giallo series, Perversion Story 1969, which I believe has a much cooler name that I can't think of off the top of my head, Lizard and a Woman's Skid 1971, and then The Great Don't Torture a Duckling 1972. So I've got my next 5 films worked out. Please join me for those. Again, I'm getting things together with the blog, but like, I've got a whole bunch of podcasts, and I'm in the process of trying to move house. I've got a lot of stuff on, but just bear with me. I'm getting better at this. I'm enjoying it more. I'm getting writing together. I'm going over old writing, even PhD writing, that I can move into blog form and all that kind of thing. So check out my blog. Maybe in like a week or so, I should have another couple of posts by then. And yeah, do indeed continue to tune into this podcast. Also tune into the Horror Film Science podcast. I will be doing an episode with my brother on Cannibal Holocaust in a couple of weeks on that one, but again, I'll tease that on this one, I would say next week. But other than that, this has been really, really fun. I absolutely love this film, and I've loved talking about it. And please join me next week for what will be episode 8, I believe, where I talk about Dr. Butcher, MD, or Zombie Holocaust. Thanks very much for joining me, guys.